Good morning. If we get everybody's attention, we are ready to begin. Welcome to Icons of Freedom 5. My name is David Scott, and I am the coordinator of Project Patch, which is the law and civic education program of the Northport-East Northport School District. This morning, I have the distinct honor of introducing to you Dean Harry Balin, who is the Dean of Touro Law Center. I cannot say strongly enough how incredible the Dean and everyone here at the Law Center has been in making this event possible. It's really just been a tremendous honor working with everyone here at Touro, and I have just tremendous gratitude for your vision and support, which has made this event possible today. So please join me and welcome Dean Balin.
Thanks very much. Thanks. I want to thank Dave for so many things, and I want to thank all of you for being here. One of the things that's happening this morning is that you are encountering living history. You are encountering living history. So these modest, unassuming heroes, Mary, Beth, and Cathy, whom you're going to meet shortly and whom I had the privilege of meeting just a moment ago, are living history. And I want to make sure that you understand the historic significance of what each of them did and the Supreme Court cases, the cases decided by the highest court in the United States, have meant to so many people in the United States and around the world. And I'm going to begin in an unusual place, and I'm only going to speak for a couple of minutes, but I want to put this actually in a global perspective for you and in a historical perspective, because you have living history. But let's talk about something else for just a moment. So I like to speak about the three declarations. So it may be that no one knows what I'm referring to when I say three declarations. So suppose I told you that the first of them was in 1776. So what would the first declaration be? No, nobody wants to answer me. So what's the first declaration in 1776? So the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence in 1776. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I don't know about you guys. I don't know about you guys, but I carry a copy around with me everywhere I go. The Declaration of Independence is a foundational document. So you'll see when I talk about these three declarations that Cathy and Mary Beth are actually connected to something that goes all the way back to the Enlightenment. You guys know what the Enlightenment is? Okay, so it's really Enlightenment ideas. And you know what the basic Enlightenment idea is that we're talking about? You know what the basic idea is? We're talking about not law, not just law. I mean, law is the smallest embodiment of it. We're talking about human rights. We're talking about human rights. And that's what these two heroes, that's what these two representatives of living history, they stand in a line that goes back to that first declaration. So that's 1776. What's the second declaration of the three declarations? And I'll give you a hint, it's 1789. Anyone taking European history? What declaration did we... Well, okay, 1789. What was the declaration? That Declaration of the Rights of Man, yes. Okay. So that's the second declaration. And you know what? That first declaration had a lot of rights in it, right? Hold on, stop. That first declaration had lots of rights in it. But what about but nothing about freedom of thought, freedom of opinion, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. That second declaration, 13 years later, which, by the way, was the same year as the Constitutional Convention, right? So I also have the Constitution here, 4,000 words long. Oh, I shouldn't have told you. I was going to ask you. The Constitution, 1789, the same year as the Declaration of the Rights of Man, is, so if you had to say, this is a very important point. Okay, la Déclaration des droits de l'homme was a declaration of the rights of man, and it is not clear that it did apply to women. So this is a very important point. But so we're talking about 1789, and in 1789, a bunch of white men left the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia with 4,000 words, the oldest and the shortest constitution in the world. There are about 200, if you exclude things like state constitutions, 200 constitutions in the world. And you know what? There was a lot of ferment in Europe. The Declaration of the Rights of Men, let's amend it, the Declaration of the Rights of Men and Women, as it should have said, that declaration did speak about the right to have your own opinion. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? You can have your own opinion. Somebody had to say that in a declaration. You can have your own opinion. You can have your own religion. You can believe your own beliefs, and you can speak them. So listen. It was by no means clear that 1789 Constitution was going to be ratified. By no means clear. You know why? Because those white men who were gathering in Philadelphia had a mandate, and the mandate was to revise and amend the Articles of Confederation. You know what they did? Those sneaky guys? They didn't amend and restate the Articles of Confederation. They came up with something completely new. Something that nobody anticipated, and they come out and it gets published in the papers and people say, no, this is not what we want. And the people who opposed it most were people called the Anti-Federalists, and they said, we won't, there's a compromise, we won't agree to this unless there are, they didn't use the word human rights, unless you attach 10 amendments, which became the Bill of Rights, which are on a plaque outside the building on the north side. And when you leave on the north side, make sure to look at that plaque. That's the Bill of Rights, 1791, that these two women have done so much to make real, to make vivid. Okay? So this is real, this is vivid. And we get these 10 amendments. And if you look at the first of them, if you look at the First Amendment, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise of religion or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. That means, by the way, you guys have to be peaceable. And to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So let me ask you something that is not often asked. Why do all those things belong together? Why should we be talking about freedom of religion and the right to assemble and freedom of the press all in one single amendment? Why? They're all forms of expression. They're all forms of opinion. They're all forms of thought. And if you look at the rights of men from 1789, if you look at it, it talks about freedom of opinion. Freedom of opinion. And again, you have a human right to your own opinions and your own beliefs. And that's why the First Amendment speaks both about freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. These are human rights. And you know what? Those guys like James Madison, who wrote these nice 4,000 words, that Constitution would not have been ratified. Look at the Federalist Papers. Would not have been ratified if it didn't have a Bill of Rights. Because the people knew, or the white men knew at the time, that those 4,000 words, as wonderful as they are, they create separation of powers, they create Congress, they create an executive branch, they create, most importantly, an independent judiciary that, you know what? Even the President of the United States is subject to that independent judiciary. And that was created by those guys in 1789. But it wasn't until we had the Bill of Rights that we had freedom of expression, which these heroes, now living history, these heroes have done so much to uphold. And then the third declaration. The third declaration is 1948. Anyone know what that is? Yes. The Declaration is called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Universal. And by the way, guess who was the moving force behind that third declaration? Who? Who is the great personality? Yes. A woman, Eleanor Roosevelt. And it's in the spirit of Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the moving force behind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the spirit of Eleanor Roosevelt, that I celebrate these two great women. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, the enthusiasm for civic education and engaging young people and learning about your rights and responsibilities is truly real here at Touro Law Center. And it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be able to have this event here today. So at this time, I'm going to ask that Northport High School student Emma Confora please come forward, and she is going to introduce our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Emma Canfora. I'm a senior at Northport High School. It is my great pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker this morning, Mary Beth Tinker. Mary Beth Tinker was one of the lead plaintiffs in the landmark Supreme Court case, Tinker versus Des Moines. As a public school student during the Vietnam era, as a matter of conscience, Mary Beth Tinker wore a black armband to school to mourn for the dead on both sides of the conflict and express her wish for peace. This act of self-expression resulted in her suspension from school. Her case was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court of the United States, which ruled in her favor, holding that students do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. This landmark holding is the basis for students' First Amendment rights in schools today. This morning, Mary Beth will tell her story as only she can tell it. Please join me in welcoming Mary Beth Tinker.
Thank you. Oh, it's so good to be with all of you. All of you young people who are changing history and using your Bill of Rights and your First Amendment. And what a wonderful way to kick it off by Dean Ballin. Did you love that? Yeah. Wow. That was great. What was that? Yeah, that was really great. So here we are at Touro Law School. The rule of law is so important in our democracy. But it doesn't come to life without people like you, right? Yeah, that's right. And so many of the people who bring the Constitution to life, who bring the Bill of Rights to life, who bring the First Amendment to life, are young people, and always have been through history. Why? It's just natural. It's right in your brains. It's right in your cells that you would want to do this. Does this make sense? It's natural. Young people always have done that. Let's see here. Oh yeah, I've been traveling around. I'm actually a nurse, and I spent most of my career working with young people and teenagers like you. So wear your seatbelts, everybody. Yes. Don't drink and drive. Yeah, don't drink. But I left the hospital a few years ago, and I decided that I needed to travel around and encourage all of you to know your rights, number one, and use them to make a better world. Do you like my van I've been traveling around in? Yeah, it's really cool. It's really been a lot of fun. So I've been all over the country speaking. So many students, teachers, and young people who are speaking up and standing up and making history today. Because 50 years from now, you're going to want people to look back and think about what you did in your time. You don't decide when you're born. But you do have some choices about how to respond to the times that you're born in. And we are living in mighty times. Do you think so? Yeah, yes we are. We definitely are. And you can have a lot to say about the decisions that are made and about the direction that our our country, our communities, your schools, and the world are going in right now. Yes, I have decided that kids are the next great leap for democracy. You think so? Yes. Emma, could you grab my water, please, honey? Young people, well, as Dean Ballin was saying, thank you, dear. There was a group of people that wrote the Constitution and worked on the Constitution. Did they include everybody? No. Who was left out? Most people, women, African Americans. Native Americans couldn't even vote till 1934. Did you know that? Native Americans could not vote till 1934 in the USA. So the democracy has always been expanding and reaching the ideals, making them real. And that's what young people, you're so good at, because you see the difference between how we talk about freedom and democracy and equality and the reality. We're not there, and we never have been. But young people like you take us closer to it. So I've decided kids really are the next great leap for democracy. And now so many young people all around the country are saying, wait, this is a human rights issue. We should also be included in the decisions that have to do with our world. Do you think so? Yeah, I knew you would. All right. So as a nurse, well, as a person, I learned the wonderful qualities of all of you through the years. You have imagination, you have courage, you have the willingness to take risk. Did you know teenagers are more willing to take risk? Yes. Yeah, you noticed? It's right in your brain chemistry, as it turns out. This is my hobby, studying your brains. Yes, so fascinating. Did you know you have more dopamine in your brains? Not dope. Dopamine. It makes you more willing to take risk, more willing to have energy, to take action. You know, young people, you like to take action. You don't like to just sit around and talk all day, right? You want to take some action. Let's get to it. And that's your great strength. But without your rights, without the First Amendment, you can't make your contribution and you can't express all of that and help our world to go forward to a better place where we actually make our ideals real. And that's why we all need to have the First Amendment. Now, what is it again? The right to free speech, freedom of religion. That's a 2-for-1 special. You get to have your religion or your beliefs, and the state, the government cannot force you to have any religion, right? By the way, could you be an atheist? Could you be a Buddhist? Could you be a Muslim? Yeah, thank you. I'm glad we had that review. Okay, so religion, and then there's the right to what? Freedom of assembly, freedom of the press. Yay! Student journalism, yeah. Whew. Let's hear it for the free press. Yeah. I mean, really, the Tinker story is a story of the free press. And we're going to hear from Cathy Kuhlmeier. And I'm so honored to be here with Cathy Kuhlmeier, Frey today, of the Hazelwood case. And thank you, David Scott, by the way. Where are you, David? Thanks for putting this all together. Nice going. All right. So yeah, the free press, and what's another one that almost nobody knows? The freedom of petition. Which basically means if you see something that's not right, that you think is unfair, you have a right to do something about it. That's a wonderful thing. Only 2% of Americans know about that right. Wow, you just beat out 98% of Americans. Nice going. All right, good going. Yeah. So yes, we need our rights if we're going to make our contribution and make things better and take the world to a better place. Oh yes, well I didn't know about all these rights when I was growing up in Des Moines, Iowa, and here's me and my little sister Hope. Yes, she's so great. We were having our ordinary lives and, having birthday parties. That's her on the left. And going to slumber parties and going roller skating and studying for our classes. And I loved math, so I was always studying for my math class and everything. Well, I love social studies too. Where's all your social studies teachers? Come on, social studies teacher! Woohoo! Yeah! Wow! Where would we be without social studies teachers? Thanks for teaching the foundations of democracy. Yeah, and you can go home and tell all your family, see if they know their rights about the First Amendment and all these things. So we were just, going along in our ordinary lives, but it was mighty times, just like now. We were growing up in mighty times, and you are growing up in mighty times. I didn't really realize it until, well, there's my sweet little brother Paul. Yeah, he's so great. There were 6 of us in our family, 6 kids. Growing up in Iowa, one time my dad went to Japan with the church because he was a Methodist minister. And he came back and he said, I went to Japan because the Japanese were our enemies in World War II. But we have to reach out to our enemies and find ways to talk with them. And really, that's what this story is about also. It's about finding ways to talk with people that we don't agree with, ways that are respectful, that are kind, and not just arguing, but finding ways to bridge those gaps. And that is, I think, one of the big jobs of our time right now. Find ways to talk to other people. Be kind, respectful. Let's have some good dialogue going, not just arguing and fighting. And so my dad taught us, and he brought back these little kimonos and things. That's my friend Jeff, I think his name. And he taught us that is the way that you should live. Respect other cultures. There's always something you can learn from other cultures. And we had a lot of fun taking our Japanese dolls around and learning all about Japan. One day, I saw some amazing children making history and making the world better and using their First Amendment rights. They were in Birmingham, Alabama. And Birmingham was called Bombingham then. That was the nickname for it, Bombingham. Why? Because the black churches there had been bombed so often. This was in 1963. Why were they being bombed? Because they were the headquarters of the civil rights movement, was in the churches. And so the KKK and the White Citizens Council, they didn't like that. And they, said, this is a white country. And they were white nationalists, right? White supremacists. You heard of white supremacists? They think whites should be supreme and that, it's against our democracy. But they had been operating like this for many years. Just bossing people around, bullying people, even lynching people. And so the children, Martin Luther King was there in jail, writing his famous letter from Birmingham jail, yeah. And, well, his message of that letter was very important also. It was that now is always the time to stand up to injustice. Now is always the time. Don't wait. Let's get started right now. Are we going to get started right now today, everybody? Yeah. I knew you would. And so the children said, that's okay, Martin Luther King. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to get out there. And yes, there were some allies, adult allies, and they helped get it moving. And the kids went out there and they were singing songs like, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine. Yeah, they were having a good old time. All right. They were letting their little light shine. Yeah, I know. You're going to do it too, I know. Those kids were amazing. Yeah, they had some other songs too, but I'll save those for another day. But they were some good songs. And they had that energy and that imagination and a wonderful quality of young people. They were willing to take risk. And they had a quality of imagining a better way. And they said, we can do better, people. We don't have to accept the way things are now with all of this inequality and these people bombing the churches. So they got out and they marched and sang and they were speaking up. Oh, well, yeah, by the way, there was a bully in town, and he had a perfect name for a bully, Bull. I'm not making this up. His name was Bull Connor. And so he said, we're not going to put up with these kids, and we're going to put the German Shepherd dogs on them, and that's what he did. And they had to build outdoor prisons with barbed wire because there were so many kids. There was almost 2,000 kids. The Birmingham Children's Campaign, 1963. This would be a great school project to write about. And by the way, guess who the heroes are of this story? The children or Bull Connor? The children. There's monuments to them. Go to Birmingham. There's a whole museum for them. They've named a whole park for them. You can see the kids and their monuments. It's wonderful. So I saw these kids on TV, and I said, they are so amazing and brave and strong. And I knew I was nothing like them. because I was very shy. And I liked to go roller skating, and I liked to go to slumber parties and have birthday parties with my sisters and brothers. And I didn't even like dogs. I was like, I'm not going to get out there with those. But I said, wow, those kids are amazing. They inspired me. And they're still inspiring young people today. Well, the Ku Klux Klan had a plan to punish the children for standing up for democracy. And so they planted a bomb in their headquarters. The 16th Street Baptist Church was their headquarters. And the Ku Klux Klan snuck in there. And they planted a bomb there, knowing it would go off right on Sunday morning when the kids were at church at Sunday school. And that's exactly what happened. September 15th, 1963, I was at a picnic. That bottom picture is me. I'm in the back with the pigtails, yeah. And my dad's there, and my older sister Bonnie, and some family friends. John's in there. And we were at a picnic when someone came by our picnic and told us what the Ku Klux Klan had done to punish the little children. Because the bodies of 4 little girls were found after the bomb went off. Denise, Carol, Addie Mae, and Cynthia. And they were about the same ages as me and my sisters. We were so sad when we heard what the Ku Klux Klan had done to those little girls. The story is really also about how you can take your feelings. And some of those feelings are feelings of sadness, of grief, frustration. You don't know what to do with those feelings. You can do something about that, and you can change all those feelings into action to make things better. And that feels so good. And that's what this story is about also, because we were able to take that sadness and do something about it. And there was a memorial service that year in Des Moines. Writer, I know you've heard of James Baldwin, right? James Baldwin, anybody? Yeah, wonderful writer. He put out a letter. And he said, what we should do is we should have memorial services all over the country, and people should wear black armbands to mourn for the little girls who'd been killed by the white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan. And so that's what happened, and that's our memorial service there in Des Moines, and that's Bill Eckhart. He was the father of Chris Eckhart, who would later wear an armband to school and become one of the plaintiffs in our case, Tinker versus Des Moines. That was 1963. I had just turned 11 years old. Well, the next year was also an amazing year for young people, standing up and speaking up. This time, they went to Mississippi for Mississippi Freedom Summer. About 700 college students from all over the country went to Ohio to train at Western College for Women on how to stand up to the Ku Klux Klan. And they said, we can do better. They had that willingness to take risks, willingness to make justice out of injustice. And they went to Mississippi that year where only about 3 or 4% of African Americans were registered to vote. Because even though many of the counties were majority African American. Why? Because of the Ku Klux Klan and their reign of terror that they had had since right after the Civil War when they got organized. As soon as the young people went to Mississippi, 3 of them went missing: Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. And the FBI started searching for them, and everyone had a feeling that the Ku Klux Klan had gotten them. I heard about it also, and my parents heard about this also, and they went to Mississippi that year. Because my dad said, you know, we can't just preach about love. It's also a story about love. We can't just preach about love. We have to put it into action. And we have to put our ideas and our feelings and our faith into action. It's not enough to just go to Sunday school and preach about these things. Really, love is the basis of all faiths. And we were raised in the faith community, and this story came out of the faith community. It came out of the idea that we should have respect and we should love all people. And so my parents said, we have to go to Mississippi and stand with these brave people. And that's what they did that summer. And they came back on my 12th birthday and told us some of the things that had happened, how they had to lay on the floor of the station wagon when they drove around so they wouldn't be shot at by the Ku Klux Klan. They told us about all the brave people that they met there in Mississippi that year. That fall, when school started back up in Mississippi, in Philadelphia, Mississippi, some students decided to wear buttons to school to protest the murders of the Ku Klux Klan. It was 1964. The students were suspended for doing that. It was an African-American school. Their administrators were black, and they were black. But they had courage, and they wore these buttons, and they said, that's not right. They noticed something that wasn't right. That's where it all starts. And then they decided to take action, and they said, we can do better, as young people always have said all through history. And so they wore these buttons to school, and they were involved with the civil rights movement, and they got suspended. A lawsuit started working its way through the courts. It was called Burnside. I had no idea that that case was going to affect my life, it was going to affect Cathy's life, it was going to affect all of you. And it's affecting students in the United States still today, and I'll tell you why. Because when they won their case in 1966 in Mississippi at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, the court said that they should have been allowed to wear those buttons because they had not substantially disrupted school. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Yes, that substantial disruption test, that's where it comes from. It comes from young people, black students in Mississippi who risked their lives, who got involved with protesting and speaking up to the Ku Klux Klan. 1966. I had no idea that that was going to be so important. But also what happened in 1964 when, let's go back, when those students did that, on August 4th, right before school started, the reason why they were so sad and they felt like they should really take action, one of the reasons was because the FBI finally found Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. Well, they found their bodies because sure enough, they had been killed by the Ku Klux Klan. And that was August 4th, 1964. In those mighty times that are so much like our mighty times, with all of these issues still going on in so many ways, August 4th, off the coast of Vietnam, a U.S. Navy ship claimed that it had been attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin, the very same day that the bodies of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman were discovered. It turns out that ship had not been attacked, and there's a whole history of that, and I give this talk very often with veterans, and we talk about it so much. But it didn't stop the U.S. Congress from voting almost unanimously then to start sending thousands of troops to Vietnam. They were already sending troops to Vietnam, but it was mostly undercover. The U.S. public didn't know about it that much. They knew a little bit, but the war was building up already. But this gave the government the real impetus to say, hey, we've been attacked. We should start sending troops to Vietnam. And that's exactly what happened. 1964, August 4th, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Same day, Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman's bodies were found. So by 1965, that Christmas, now, my dad would preach to us from the Bible and light the candles at Christmas time, right about now. A month before Christmas, he would start lighting every week a candle in the Yule log we had. And he would preach to us kids around the dining room table the story of Christmas and the promise of the little baby that was born after Joseph and Mary came up from the city of David to Nazareth, and this idea of love and forgiveness that goes through all faiths. But on TV, we didn't see love and forgiveness. We saw war, as the Vietnam War was building up. And this is one of these famous photos of the brave journalists who went to Vietnam to tell the public what was going on, Larry Burroughs. Now on the news, we saw the war. And us kids were getting sadder and sadder about all of this. We were already pretty sad about what had happened in Birmingham, Mississippi. Now we have this. And I know all of you know what I'm talking about. When you see the news and it's frustrating and you feel sad, you feel emotional. It's like a little girl told me recently in Ohio. She said, I see the news and I don't know what to do about it. I feel so bad. And I told her, I feel the same way, but we can find things to do about it. And that makes us feel better, and it makes the world better also. So we didn't know what to do about all that, but some of the high school kids, like my brother John and Bruce Clark and Chris Singer, they heard about the idea of wearing black armbands to school, to mourn for the dead on both sides of the war. And they said, let's wear black armbands to school this Christmas, and we will be mourning for the dead, and we'll call for a Christmas truce, like Senator Robert Kennedy is talking about having a truce this Christmas. Actually, kids are so logical, too, because we thought, well, it's Christmas, and that time of year, and Hanukkah's coming up, and all of these faiths, have times to celebrate various, ideas of their faiths. Muslims have ideas to celebrate of having love and understanding in the world. Jews have this faith. Christians, all faiths. And so at that time of year, we thought, yeah, that's what, we're getting all these little Christmas cards that say peace on it with glittery things, But we said, hey, why don't the adults start following this instead of just talking about it all the time? And so I decided, well, I would try to wear a black armband to school to do this, but I was really nervous and scared, and I got there and I had my black armband on and everything, and I'll show you here. Oh yeah, it was Christmas time. That's me and my big sister and little Hope. Christmas time, 1965. We were sad about a lot of things, but we were also celebrating. You can do those two things both at the same time. There's joy and sorrow at the same time. And so here's me and my mother, and my dad's behind me. Chris Singer is there too. She went to school with an armband, and I think that's Ross. And because the principals met, they heard about our plan, and they decided that there would be a rule against armbands. And so we wanted to change their mind, and we tried to, but they wouldn't change their mind. So I said, I don't know if I should do this. I'm really nervous. I'm scared. I was 13. I was in 8th grade. It was 1965. There had been about 1,000 soldiers, U.S. soldiers, killed in the war. Eventually, there would be about 58,000 U.S. soldiers killed, and 2 to 3 million Vietnamese. And so we were sad, and I decided, okay, I will try to do this. I had that example of those other young people, like the kids in Birmingham. I had my armband, and I went off to school. I was really nervous and scared, and my friends said, you better take off that armband. And at lunchtime, some boys at the boys' table, yeah, we had our girls' table, and then the boys had their boys' table. Does this sound familiar? As they were teasing me and everything, they're like, I want an armband for Christmas, and I just ignored them like I always did. So I got to my math class, which was always my favorite class. I did like such social studies too, all of you. But I got to math class, and I saw my math teacher, Mr. Moberly, holding a pink slip. And he said, you have to go to the office, Mary Beth. That's against the rules to wear that armband. And so I went down to the office, and I was really nervous and scared. And Mr. Willitson, the vice principal, said, now, Mary Beth, that's against the rules to wear that armband, so take it off right now. And I looked at Mr. Willitson, and I looked around the office, and I said, okay, here you go, Mr. Willitson. I took off that armband. You know what? I learned a very important lesson right then. You don't have to be the bravest person in the history of the world. You don't have to be Rosa Parks. You can be you. You can be nervous. You can be scared. And you probably will be when you speak up about something. It kind of goes with it. But it's okay. Just do it anyway, and you'll be amazed what a difference you can make. And so that's what I did, and I was thinking, I'm excited, glad that's over with and everything. And yeah, it wasn't quite over, as you can see, because I went back to my class, and then Mrs. Tarman, the girls' advisor, shows up, and she said, now, Mary Beth, we want you to come back to the office because we have to talk to you about something. So I went back there, and she said, now, you're going to be suspended. And she gave me my suspension paper. Yeah, I found this in a box a few months ago. Always keep your suspension paper. You just never know when you might need that sometime, guys. Yeah, I found it. I was so happy. And it says, Mary Beth, Mr. and Mrs. Leonard Tinker, it says December 16th. We're coming up on the anniversary. getting suspended. And Mary Beth, it will be necessary because Mrs. Tarman is saying that Mary Beth was suspended for wearing an armband which the Board of Education ruled against. So I took my paper and I went home, and I was really nervous and scared because my dad, I knew he had been against the idea of wearing the armbands. But you see, kids, you're so persuasive. Have you ever persuaded your parents of anything? Yeah, you're like this morning. Kids are persuasive. That's another one of your great qualities. And so we said to our dad, but Dad, look how you speak up for what you believe in. And it's our conscience. And so we got him over to our side. Yeah, that's good. But I was really nervous, and I was scared, and I didn't know about, well, my brother John got suspended the next day. 5 kids got suspended. Even little Hope, my sister Hope was in 5th grade. She did not get suspended, but she wore a black armband to school. And so did Paul. He was in 2nd grade. And they said, we want peace, we want peace. So they had put on armbands and gone off to school too. They didn't get suspended. And we went back to their schools, by the way, a few years ago on the exact 50th anniversary of them wearing their armbands and talked to whole big groups of 5th graders, and it was really great. There's Chris Eckhart with his parents. There was a group called Iowans for Peace that our parents had gotten involved with. It's not just like Mary Beth woke up one morning and decided to wear an armband. There was other people involved. There was a group of people. The Vietnam War was building up. By this time, my parents were involved with the Quakers, although my dad was still a Methodist minister. And so some of these people came and stood up for us and believed that we should have been able to have our rights. But some people were really mean, and they sent things like this postcard. Yeah, here's my hate postcard, one of them. Some of them are in the museum in Washington, D.C. If you ever go to the museum, go there and you can see the armband and the hate mail. And isn't that crazy? It says hate right on it. At least it was a clear message. And what was that red thing, by the way? Saying we were communists. Oh yeah, everybody was called a communist. Martin Luther King was called a communist. All of them. If you dared to say anything that you believed in, like racial justice and peace and things like that, you were called a communist. My mom would say, we're not communists, we're Methodists. Get that straight. Yeah, the hate. They were out there. Well, we also had another friend. Well, someone, too, this person in the Marine Corps, Marine Corporal Harry, he wrote a letter to the editor in Des Moines and saying, hey, why do you think I'm in the Marines? Because I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in our Constitution. Let these kids have their opinion. Just because they're kids, they should still have a right to have their First Amendment rights and have an opinion. And another group that came to our aid was the American Civil Liberties Union. You ever heard of the ACLU? Who's heard of the ACLU? All right, yeah, let's hear for the ACLU, boy. They're out there. They're out there today speaking up for your rights, the ACLU. They're coming up on their 100th anniversary. And they said, wait a minute now, these kids should have their rights. And so they came and helped us. And they said, first you've got to go back and try to negotiate. Always negotiate. First thing, if you have a disagreement, try to negotiate. And they said that, and we did. We tried. School board wouldn't change their mind. So they said, well, we're going to have to go over to our other branch of government. You know the 3 branches? What are they? Legislative, executive, judicial. So the ACLU is like, we're going to have to go over to the judicial branch because your schools the public schools are like the legislative branch because they're run by the legislature, they're run by taxes. So they did. They took it to court. And, you know, the ACLU lawyer, we had a wonderful lawyer named Dan Johnston, right out of law school. He had just graduated, he was young. And he argued, these kids, you know, weren't hurting anybody, they didn't disturb anything, and they should have their rights. And the school board lawyer said, but wait, we get to be the ones to decide what is expressed in school. We run the schools, it's our schools. And they argued back and forth, and we lost. And here's us losing at the appeals court in the 8th Circuit. I have no idea why we were smiling. That's my brother John, since we had just lost our case. But at this point, right around that time, remember the students in Birmingham and in Mississippi that had protested Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. It was the Mississippi students, not the Birminghams. The Burnside students, they won their case. They won their right to wear those buttons that said one man, one vote. Remember? Yeah. Okay, so now you've got one appeals court saying students have a right to express themselves, and one court saying no, they do not. And so it was a perfect setup to be appealed to the Supreme Court. You could have different parts of the country deciding different things, because these things are interpreted by human beings. It's not like there's some book you can go to look up these things. There's interpretation. And that's why all of you should be in on interpreting it. Why not? They're decided by other people. Why shouldn't you also weigh in? And I think you should. And so it was appealed to the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court only takes about 80 cases a year out of around 10,000. They don't have time to be hearing all these cases. And so they decided to take the case. We were so happy. And it went to the Supreme Court. And I mean, I was going on with my life. Like, I was making friends at my new school. I had moved to St. Louis from Iowa. And I was really scared in my new school because I didn't know anybody, and it was like a big school. St. Louis, oh my goodness, it was so scary to be in the big city of St. Louis. And so life was going on for me. I was going to folk dance club, I was studying for my classes and everything, but we were also going to court again. Well, in 1969, when I was a junior in high school, in February, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the ruling. The Supreme Court ruled by 7-2, and I was so surprised that students do have First Amendment rights in the public schools, and that you do not leave your rights when you enter the schoolhouse gate. It said that neither teachers or students do not lose their expression rights at the schoolhouse gate, and they said that students are persons under our Constitution, and they said that as long as you do not substantially disrupt school, and they named the Burnside kids and the Burnside case. That's where it comes from. If you do not substantially disrupt school and you do not impinge on the rights of others, whatever that means, that's been debated ever since, that you should have your right to express yourselves in the public schools. It was a huge victory for young people all over the country, and for all of you. Come on, all of you. Let's hear it for all of you. Yeah. Go Supreme Court. Supreme Court, very important. 7-2. William Brennan, Thurgood Marshall, Justice White, Douglas, Powell voted that you should have your First Amendment, and that our school board had made a mistake. Could that be possible? Could teachers ever make a mistake? Hey, teachers, yeah. It was a wonderful victory for students' rights. I had no idea how important it was. I grew up and I became a nurse. I didn't know that this case was going to be so important for young people all through the country for years to come. But I left my hospital a few years ago, and I started traveling around, as I said, to speak to students, and I met so many young people who are using their rights. Here's Mariah. She was in Arizona, and she wore a Black Lives Matter shirt to school. Should she have a right to do that? Yes, she should. Well, she was pulled into the security office and told she could not wear that shirt for photo day. But I have to hand it to the very wise principal, because he changed his mind. After Mariah there were some people from Black Lives Matter who came, and they talked, and they reached across, and they came to some understanding, and he realized that he was wrong. I thought that was very wise, and this is her post the day that she was able to start wearing her shirt. She took action, and she changed something. This is when I was in Ohio recently, and the students had painted that rock with all the names of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas students who were killed, and they had just jumped on the buses and gone up to the Ohio State Legislature to lobby for safer gun laws. I'm a nurse. I was especially a trauma nurse. I started in emergency rooms. I worked mostly with teenagers and children. And on average, every 3 hours, a child or a teenager is shot and killed in the United States. The ones that aren't killed would be my patients. They would be shot, some blinded, quadriplegic, all kinds of injuries. So I was so excited when the movement started for March for Our Lives. And I thought it was just wonderful how young people were standing up for themselves, standing up for yourselves. Because who got involved with March for Our Lives? Anybody here? Yeah, all right, let's hear it for the young, brave March for Our Lives people. Yeah. I think it's a very exciting movement. And I love how they've reached out also to kids of color who are not shot in school shootings, but shot one at a time so much in the United States. I thought that was very, very wise of them. Here's some kids in Houston. They decided to use their faith and go down to the border to speak up and protest against family separation. I thought that was very courageous of them to put their faith into action in that way. And here's some students in New York. All right, let's hear it for New York, everybody. Yeah, it was really about 100,000 students. Nice going. Well, here's a shirt that a boy wore in Michigan recently to say that he was in favor of the border wall, Trump's border, proposition there. Does he have a right to wear that shirt? Yes. Yes, because of what? The First Amendment. Well, he was told he could not wear that shirt, and it went to court. Guess what? He just got a $25,000 award from the school district and a letter of apology. So, yes, he did have a right to wear that shirt. He has a right to express himself. Yeah, that was good. I know. Let's hear it for him. He's out there expressing his views. Yeah, we want to have more, let's have more talk in life and less censoring. More talk, less censor. Here's some girls I met at a big journalism conference in Fort Collins, Colorado recently. They started a whole suicide prevention program at their school after one of the students at the school committed suicide. And I was so glad that they were doing that because they're using their free press rights to talk about it in their school papers and to make a difference. Here's Khadija. I just met her in Chicago at Loyola Law School, actually. They have this program in their high schools where they are changing the laws in the Illinois state legislature to decrease the amount of suspensions and expulsions from the high schools. There's so much a higher rate of suspension and expulsion among kids of color. And so they didn't think that was right because that can lead to a lifetime of imprisonment in the criminal justice system in and out. And so they wanted to change that so that it doesn't start in school with suspensions and expulsions. And they got 2 laws passed, one in the Illinois House and one in the Senate, to decrease suspensions and also to put in preventive services and promotion, like after-school programs and things like that that'll help students. Well, here's Gavin. Yeah, he's trans. And does he have a right to be himself and to be in school? I mean, and could this be controversial? Yes, it's very controversial. But this is about controversy and how we deal with controversial issues because we don't want to just sweep them under the rug. We need to talk about them. Gavin had a lot of courage. And this is one I was just at a few weeks ago. These are students at the Supreme Court. Now I like to go hang out at the Supreme Court. Yeah, it's so much fun. I live in Washington, D.C. It's so interesting. Here's some students I met down there a few weeks ago. They were there having a rally for a court case that's going on in the country. It's called Juliana versus U.S. And they're suing the Environmental Protection Agency, saying that they need to do their job and take care of the water and the air for current generations and for the future. Because you know what? They always say young people are the future, but actually you're the present also. And so they said, we need to have cleaner air and cleaner water. And they were down there rallying. And the Supreme Court ruled a few weeks ago that their case could proceed. It was a very big victory. They still haven't ruled in favor of them, but they are saying, yes, you can keep having your case. It can proceed. And here's one of my last stops, which was at my old junior high school, Warren Harding Junior High School, where I went in 2015 with my brother John to celebrate the 50th anniversary of getting suspended. Yeah, it's really great. And that's the locker they dedicated to me at the school. I'm so excited, number 319. And I was traveling around the country and I asked students, what should I put in my locker? And they said, put some constitutions in there and put some school newspapers in there and armbands. And so that's what we did, and we had a great celebration. And I'm excited that we're going to go back there this February to celebrate 50 years of the Supreme Court saying that students do have rights in the public schools and that we want to hear your voices because you make the world better. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. Thank you. Woo-hoo! All right. Yeah. So, David, do we have time for a few comments, questions? Yeah, I want to hear what you all are standing up about. Yes, sir.
Okay. So just give me 1 second. All right, so just before we take the question, I just want to make sure, are we ready upstairs? So the way this is going to work, if you have a question, if you would just be kind enough to say your name and what school you're from, and then ask the question, okay?
Bayshore High School. All right, Bayshore, let's hear it. All right.
Okay.
I like how there was a history.
Come up here. Hop up here. Come on. Come on. Here, let's see. There you go. Go for it.
Yeah, I like how there was a history behind the black armbands prior to you wearing them. I'd just like to know if there was a reason specifically that you chose the black armbands to adopt your cause.
Thank you very much. Why did we pick the black armbands? This is a symbol of mourning. It means you're sad. It goes way back through history. Have you ever heard that saying, wearing your feelings on your sleeve? That's where it comes from. When you wear this on your sleeve, like you might be at school, you might be at work, but everybody knows you're kind of sad today. That's why we picked that. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Did I just wreck it? Thank you.
Okay, so student right here, if you could just come up. You have to come and be on the mic.
Hi, I'm Isabella from Bay.
Hi, Isabella. It doesn't seem to be working, though.
Hello. Oh, there it is. What would you have done if you hadn't won your Supreme Court case? Would you have continued to pursue your right to wear the black armband?
If we hadn't won the case, I'm not sure. I think I would still be speaking up and standing up. I'd probably try to do what Cathy has done and continue to be a champion for the rights of young people, because I like young people, and I became a nurse and worked mostly with children and teenagers, and that's where I really learned a lot about how you need your rights. So I think I probably would have kept going on. But because, most of the things I speak up and stand up about, I lose. But I found out that it's still a good way of life, trying to speak up and stand up. Like they've closed about 45 schools in Washington, public schools where I live, in the last 10 years. And we get all involved trying to keep the schools open, and the kids stand up and they speak at hearings and things. But they closed, we did save a few of them, but. So yeah, there's various things I stand up and speak up about. But it's okay, keep on going. Sometimes you're gonna win, and it is a good way of life. Thank you. I get to meet all of you. Okay, great. Up top.
Hi, so my name is Alyssa Popek, and I'm from Massapequa High School.
Hi, my name is Patricia.
So last March, we participated in the National School Walkout, us along, I think it was like 20 other students, and our school ended up giving us in-school suspension for a day. So we were wondering how you dealt with the controversy and the reactions, because some people agreed with us, some people didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you deal with that, and then how did you know what to do afterwards?
Yeah, when there are controversial things that come up, because that is a controversial issue, and maybe I think there should be more forums in the schools, more classes, to teach the skill of how to communicate with people that we don't agree with. It is a skill that we learn. And there were some students, maybe you saw in the paper recently, where some students were photographed in Wisconsin giving what looked like a Nazi salute. And so, they started holding community meetings. They're going to put in some programs and beef up the ones they already have. in the schools about anti-Semitism and anti-racism programs. I think every school in America should have an anti-racism program to talk about these issues. But I'm so glad that you're doing that and that you're speaking up about that. Yeah.
I will take a question from down here.
Did you? I think she had something else to add. Did you have something to add?
Okay, so take one more up top, and then the next student, if you want to.
Hi, I'm Katie Scalzo from Shore Wading River. I have a two-part question. The first would be, how did the Supreme Court case affect your move from Des Moines, because you moved schools? Was that affected by the Supreme Court case? And how did the people at the new school receive you because of the Supreme Court case?
We didn't move to St. Louis because of the case. And when I got there, nobody really knew about it. In fact, when we won, hardly anybody knew about it, I think. I mean, it was in the New York Times, but in St. Louis, they don't read the New York Times too much, but it was probably in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch also. What kind of surprised me was how the teachers kind of ignored it. Because I would have thought, like in social studies or English, like a teacher would have said, hey, everybody, something kind of interesting happened to Mary Beth yesterday. But it was, I think they were just kind of surprised and shocked, and people didn't really know what to do about it, because it changed the power dynamics in schools. Before, it was always up to the administration to decide what was discussed in school, and the teachers somewhat. Now, the Supreme Court said, wait a minute now, you don't get to have every say about what goes on in the schools. It doesn't belong to you, the school. It belongs to the United States public, to everybody, because it's the public schools. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question here.
All right. Hello, my name is Juan Torres, and I am the senior class president at Bayshore High School.
Hey, all right.
And I'm currently an official youth representative for the Ribbon International, an organization that's also for nuclear disarmament. And I just wanted to ask, in your opinion, from what you've seen, what really helps to get teens really active in a sort of movement?
What helps get teens really active? What has helped you to get teens involved in your in your pro-disarmament movement? And by the way, you know the peace symbol, you know the peace sign, right, everybody? That really means nuclear disarmament. And there's a whole history to that that would be very interesting for a school report, but regardless. So how did you get students involved in your program, Mom? That's great.
Mainly trying social media, but the problem is that many teens think that a hashtag is enough to cause change, or is enough to alert people about what's happening, because you can know what's happening in the world, but it doesn't spark enough for you to change, because you could care less, you know. So I just want to know what can be done to get them really out there.
What could get students? Anybody got an idea? How can you get students? You that were involved with March for Our Lives or other things. Yes. A grassroots. I'll repeat what you say if you. Oh yeah, pass.
Myself and Tanya are involved in a grassroots NGO to end child marriage in the U.S. because it's illegal in 48 states.
End child marriage. That's your thing. Yes. Good.
And the issue might probably be that you're targeting the wrong audiences. As a whole, it's I'm not going to say that it's impossible to change people's minds, but you need to, there are many like-minded people, and you need to get into contact with them. So I think that social media, while it's not necessarily a means for change, it's a great means for communication. So you just need to find like-minded people who are willing to take action. I don't think that it's that they're not out there. I think that it's perhaps the search. But if you want to get people active, information. Like most people don't know there's a problem. I think people think that there are stricter restrictions on nuclear powers and arms than there are.
So glad you're working on that. Anybody else have idea how to get teenagers involved?
I think we have a question.
With action? Yeah? So good you're doing that. Yes, we need less nuclear weapons in our world. I'm so glad you're doing that. Yeah, right. Who's next?
Hi, my name is Emily Pasulo, and I go to Massapequa High School. If you found yourself in school today, what problems do you think that the school should not only address but encourage talking about?
What issues do I think that should be addressed in school today?
Yes.
What issue do you think should be addressed in school today? Yes?
The school shootings, possibly.
What?
The school shootings, immigration, However, it's understandable that these are controversial. Would you think that standing up for these in school would be a valid way of doing it, or should students go about it such like through social media?
Yeah, speaking up in school. And what was the issue again?
Like, what would you think would be worth fighting for in school to not only have schools, like students be able to talk about it, but have schools encourage talking about it in the classroom?
Yeah, what's worth speaking up and standing up about in school, everybody? What do you think? What are some issues you guys think is worth speaking up about? Who's got one? What? Holler out. Racism. Okay, good idea. What else is worth speaking up about? I mean, I think there are so many things. Having a say in your schools. There's some students in D.C. And around the country. How about voting at age 16? Is anybody in favor of that? Now, that's a controversial idea that's going on right now. Some students are saying that. Yes?
My name is Justin from Islip, and I want to ask you, I got this question fed to me, so it wasn't off the top of my head, but how do you feel about kneeling for the flag, you know, like the football players?
Kneeling for the flag. Yeah, how do you all think about that? What about that issue? There was the only big Supreme Court case that had to do with student speech rights before ours was called Barnett. It was in 1943. Some Jehovah's Witnesses, they came from their faith too. They didn't think that they should have to salute the flag because it was against their religion to do that. And so they won at the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, this is a wonderful ruling by Robert Jackson, the justice on the Supreme Court. Read it sometime, it's beautiful. It says that, if you have to force people to pledge allegiance to your democracy, you've got a problem. And it's not very flattering towards your democracy if you have to go out and force people under punishment to pledge allegiance to it. So they ruled that no, we are not going to force students in schools to pledge allegiance to the flag. So do you have a right not to pledge allegiance? Of course you do. And I think the students who are doing that are trying to give a message, right? The message is about violence against black people in the United States. And so my feeling is like, let's talk about the message they're trying to give and have some respect for the students that are bringing up that message. It is a very important issue to deal with in our country right now. In fact, I think it's probably one of the most important issues, if not the most important one. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Portillo, and I'm from Holy Trinity Diocesan High School.
All right.
So everybody wants to know from like our table, what would you have done if you went to private school? Because we go to private school, and I mean, what about our rights?
Yeah, private schools. That's very interesting because the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. It's about the government deciding what is said and what is not said. And so private schools, it's a whole different ballgame because you go there voluntarily. And so you voluntarily agree to follow, the rules. When you go to private schools, you're not covered by these Supreme Court precedents and by the First Amendment. I mean, there are limits. Your rights cannot be abused as far as, there are certain rights that you have as a child in the United States. But it's different. But are there still things you can speak up about and make changes in private schools? You better believe it. And I go to schools all over the country where students are speaking up and standing up about things in the private schools and making a big difference. Are you speaking up about things in your school?
Well, last year we tried having a walkout, the national walkout. We tried to participate, and we tried to give it up, involve the administration, and they did get involved, but they didn't let us walk out. We had a prayer service, and we had a prayer service for the deceased, not about gun laws. So we did do something, but it wasn't what everybody wanted. But I mean, something.
Yeah, well, that's good you did something. I mean, you did more than probably a lot of students in public schools did in a way, so that was really good. And also, I want to add, there was a question earlier about getting in-school suspension after a walkout. Remember, in the Tinker case, the ruling, it said that you have your rights in public school, but you cannot substantially disrupt school or impinge on the rights of others. So sometimes if you take an action, you have to be willing to take the consequences, right? That's called civil disobedience, dissent. There's a whole history of it in our country. But it has to be something you feel really strongly about. You have to be willing. It's got to be peaceful, and you have to be willing to take the consequences. But sometimes it is worth it to take the consequences. And that's what we all have to decide for ourselves. What is it that it's worth it for us to speak up about? Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'll just share also from the perspective of a public school educator that there certainly are some things that as a public school educator I can't do. Like I can't, in my capacity as a public school educator, have a prayer service with my students because that would be a violation of the Establishment Clause. So in a private school setting, perhaps there may be more freedom. And while the First Amendment may not be applicable in saying that the school has to allow you to do this, we're all Americans, and those values that are inherent in the First Amendment still unite all of us, and hopefully those are coming to life in all school settings, whether it's a public school or a private school.
So true.
So we're going to go to a question up top.
Hi, I'm Mahdi Rashidzada, and I'm from Shoreham Wading River High School. And my question is, what is your opinion on the allowance of controversial figures, like being able to speak hate speech at college campuses, and whether or not college campuses have the right to sort of not allow them?
Hate speech should be allowed. There's no legal definition of hate speech, first of all. There's a great book that just came out about it called Hate, Why We Should Talk Instead of Censor, something like that, by Nadine Strawson, the past president of the ACLU. It's really good. But personally, I'm in favor of not censoring, but instead, let's talk about the differences, even when it comes to hateful speech, as much as possible. Because, I mean, when you start censoring, it's a question of where does it end? And so the limits right now in the law are that the speech cannot cause imminent violence. And so I think that we have to try to emphasize dialogue and talking more to people that disagree with us, and not censoring. Of course, when it gets into violence, that's a whole different thing.
So we have another question over here, Mary Beth.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Joshua Chan. I'm from Brentwood High School.
Yeah.
My question is, since you're a nurse, what are your thoughts on the NRA saying that you should stay in your line?
What are my thoughts on the NRA what?
Saying you should stay in your line.
You should stay in line?
Stay in line. Stay in your line.
Stay in your own and don't talk about these things. Yeah, well, a lot of adults, want to tell young people that you don't know what you're talking about, that you shouldn't speak up. But I say, no, that's not right at all. You should speak up. You need to talk. These things affect your life. Remember, 1 in every 3 hours, a student is killed in the USA. You have a right to say something about that. And so, when we spoke up about Vietnam, they said, you all don't know anything about Vietnam. Well, guess what? The adults didn't even know hardly anything about Vietnam. They didn't even know where it was, a lot of them. So, yeah, people always want to tell kids. That's part of the discrimination against young people, to say that you don't know what you're talking about, you should stay in your place. Don't do that. You do know a lot of things, and I respect that. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to a question up top.
Hi, my name is Danielle Pearson. I'm from Massapequa High School. During our school's walkout, during all the school shootings, they told us that we could only go into the backfield. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are.
You could what? Can you speak up a little?
Our school told us that we could only be on the field during the walkout. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the school restricting us on the walkout.
That they told you that you could be on the field and then you wouldn't have any consequences at the walkout?
Yes, they said that we can go onto the field behind the school, but we couldn't go in front of the
But you
school.
could not go in front of the school.
Yes.
How did you feel about that? Did you have the walkout in the field that they told you could go in?
Yes, some students went onto the field, but some of them went in front of the school and sat in front of the school, and they were punished for it.
I see, and some were punished.
Yes, the
I'm
ones that
glad
went in
I'm glad that you did something, and I'm glad that you didn't get spanked like this kid in Arkansas who got spanked for the walkout. But there are restrictions in schools, and I talk to a lot of administrators, and it's not easy for them either, trying to figure out. They're trying to keep you, from getting hurt and things like that. So, try to work with your administrators whenever you can. Definitely try to negotiate. It's just like what the ACLU said. Always try to negotiate and try to do as much as you can. Definitely, it's important. Thank you. Yes. And by the way, if we don't get to all the questions, or if anybody ever wants to reach me, it's tinkertour@gmail. Tinkertour, yes. Gmail, write to me.
We're going to take time for one more question, and then we're going to take a short break, come back, and have Cathy Kuhlmeier's presentation. But here's the good news. After Cathy Kuhlmeier speaks, we're going to have a session of open mic with me, Mary Beth, and Cathy. So those of you that have not had an opportunity to ask your questions now, there will be another open mic question-answer session later. So we have time for one more question. So
great. Oh, there's going to be a protest, Dave. Better watch out. Yes. 2. Oh, see?
My name is Emma. I'm from Connecticut High School. I was just wondering, the Supreme Court obviously took a long time for your case to get there. So how long were you actually suspended, and what time? Like, what did you do during?
We were suspended on December 16th. My brother was suspended the next day. 5 kids were suspended. We were suspended until we would come back to school without the armbands. And so we came back to school when Christmas vacation was over. We came back in January, 1st of January. We couldn't wear our armbands, but here's the creativity of all of you young people. Guess what we did? We wore all black clothes for the rest of the year. Yeah. And we're like, we said, well, they can't tell us to take our clothes off. Yeah.
all right, so
There's always a way. There's always a way.
for this segment, and then we're going to take a short break.
Hi, I'm Karina Flores. I'm a junior at Brentwood High School, and I have one question. If you could go back in time, what would you like to change?
If I could go back in time, what would I like to change about our case?
Basically about anything that was going on in your school at the time.
Things that happened at our school. I think I would like to be a little more aware of how important all of this was going to turn out to be, because I was basically kind of clueless. For many years, I didn't really get it. I mean, you'd think I would know because Supreme Court, hello, it's kind of important. But I didn't realize it was going to be this big landmark case. And I definitely would have taken more photos. Yeah, should have done that. Thank you. Thank you.
So here's the plan. We're going to take exactly a 10-minute break. We're going to reconvene with Cathy Kuhlmeier-Frey's presentation. So just follow your teacher's directions. You can stretch in place. Those of you that need to use the restroom, you'll have the opportunity to do that now. But let's give Mary Beth Tinker a huge round of applause.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks. I love you. Thank you, guys.
All right, so we'll see you in 10 minutes. So before we start with the next segment, I just want to go over some logistics. So the rule here is that there is no food or drink in the auditorium. So for those of you that do have food or drink, I'm just going to ask that for the drinks that you have, please put the caps on them tightly and kindly put them away. And if you do have food, I'm going to ask that you also put that away. And that's for 2 reasons. One is there's an issue with respect to having food in this room, as there's a rule against it. But also, we are recording this event, and to the extent that you're eating or like rustling with a potato chip bag or something like that, that's going to get picked up on the audio, and it's just going to ruin our recording. So if you have food and drink out at this time, I'm just going to ask that you kindly put it away. So along with that, because we did kind of have a violation of the rule here at the Law Center, I'm just going to ask that the teachers and the students here just be extra diligent in when you do leave. If you could just really check your area very carefully, make sure there isn't any food debris left, and please just clean that up so that we don't have a problem. I'd really appreciate it. We're guests here, and I want to be respectful of the Law Center's rules. Okay? So welcome back. So we're going to continue with our Icons of Freedom program. Wasn't Mary Beth Tinker wonderful this morning? So we're going to follow the same protocol. We're going to have Cathy Kuhlmeier-Frey speak to you momentarily. After Cathy speaks, there's going to be an opportunity for Q&A with Cathy, specifically related to her case. And when that Q&A is done, I'm also going to invite Mary Beth back and Cathy. Mary Beth and I will field questions, not necessarily specifically related to the cases, but any First Amendment free speech issues that you might be thinking about today. So at this time, I'm going to invite Northport High School student Isabella Anton to the podium, who is going to introduce Cathy Kuhlmeier Frey.
Hi, I'm Isabella Anton. I'm a sophomore at Northport High School. It's my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Cathy Kuhlmeier Frey. As a student at Hazelwood East High School in Missouri, Cathy Kuhlmeier Frey served as the student editor of the school newspaper, The Spectrum. The paper was an integral part of the curriculum for Journalism 2 course at Hazelwood East High School. In the spring of 1983, with support from her teacher and faculty advisor, Kuhlmeier Frey sought to publish articles on teen pregnancy and divorce in The Spectrum. School principals removed those stories from the paper. Believing this censorship violated students' rights against free speech and free press under the First Amendment, Kuhlmeier decided to file a lawsuit against her school, which eventually made its way to the Supreme Court of the United States. This morning, Cathy Kuhlmeier Frey will share her story. Please join me in giving a good, warm welcome to Cathy Kuhlmeier Frey.
Good morning, everybody. How are we? Hey, upstairs. Please accept my apologies in advance if I sound like maybe Kermit the Frog kind of thing, because I've managed to catch a cold that doesn't want to seem to let me go. We are tight friends right now. So, we get closer to the mic. Is that better? So, 1983. I am a junior in high school, and I like to write. And I was a good kind of kid in school, probably like most of you, because you're participating in something like this. I tried to do the right things, and I was active in marching band and the drama club and those kind of fun things. I attempted to play soccer. But most importantly, I like to write. And we had the opportunity to participate in journalism classes at school. It was an actual class. It wasn't a club activity. So I got involved in that. And so you guys have a basic knowledge right now of what happened with Tinker, and I think you have some kind of understanding as well as what happened in my case. And I'd like to just give you a quick interaction with you. By show of hands, can you just raise your hands real quickly if you think that always the administration is right? Raise your hand. You guys rock. You do? Okay. So everybody else, you think maybe the students were okay, that we should have won? Hopefully. Yay, students. Okay. So, I am going to tell you the unheard story of Hazelwood. You know what textbooks say, everything is not the gospel truth. There is an untold story of Hazelwood that I think for you that maybe felt that the administration was right, I think hopefully, at least by the end of the story, you may have a different opinion of this. So, like I said, in school, I elected to take Journalism 1, and I had that teacher, Mr. Sturgis, that hopefully you guys, is your connection to the most amazing teacher, and you believe everything that they say, and you know they're going to go out on a limb, and they're going to help you through everything possible. Any hard times you may have, that's that teacher, and hopefully you guys all have that person. And my guy was Mr. Sturgis, and he taught us in Journalism 1, we're going to learn how to be a journalism staffer for J2. Should we pass the class? Evidently I passed, right? Because I got to be on staff, hence why I'm here. So in J1, we learned the 5 W's about journalism, of the who, what, when, where, and why. We learned about the Tinker Standard, who you just heard about from Mary Beth, who is a rock star in my world. And we also learned about prior restraint. And by definition, prior restraint says it prohibits the government or the school from banning expression of ideas prior to their publication. The rule against prior restraint is based on the principle that freedom of the press is essential to a free society. Attempts by the government or the school to obtain a prior restraint have largely been unsuccessful. Basic translation in my very simple world that I still live in terms of you can't censor is what I took away from that. So I had the Tinker standard that I had, protection as a student in high school, and I also learned that they can't censor me. So, kind of important tools as a journalist, right? Sturgis also taught us about the fact that you want to be fair and accurate. You want to tell two sides of the tale and make sure that you are accurate in your reporting, and this is so very important. So in high school, the Spectrum was kind of a fluffy, pretty paper, and we talked about things before I was on staff that were fun things like who is prom king and queen, or who won homecoming queen kind of things, and how did the football team do? And my staff felt that we wanted to do something a little more important, some hard-hitting things, and we identified problems within our school that related to teenagers. Still relevant problems, I would assume, for you guys today. And tell me if I'm wrong, but somewhere in your school you've got kids that are a child of a divorced parent. You may have a pregnant student in your school. You may have someone that has run away or is considering that option. Those were things that we identified as issues in Hazelwood East. Hazelwood East was a school of about 2,500 kids in a suburban St. Louis area. Weird how everything rolls back to St. Louis, right? It's not that bad. It really wasn't a bad place. But we went to the morgue of stories, which is the dead story ideas of things, a location that you can find past story topics and just ideas, and we went there and we found those topics, and that's why we decided that those were very relevant to our students. And we wrote those articles. And we researched them while Sturgis was still there. On the account of the teenage pregnancies, we talked to 3 different girls amongst a population between 35 and probably 40 students at Hazelwood that were pregnant at the time, which is a pretty high population for considering the amount of students that were in the school. And we were so forward at that point in the 80s that we had a daycare in school. That was a big deal. Like I said, Mr. Reynolds, it was his first year as principal, and he really didn't want the issue to be heard and seen that there were pregnant girls in Hazelwood. It was supposed to be a secret, and it was an embarrassment to him as a new principal. But when we talked to these 3 girls, we got their different accounts. One girl thought, yay, I'm going to have a baby, and it's all sunshine and rainbows, and not processing the point of how hard that might be. The second girl said, yes, I am pregnant, and now what do I do? And the third girl was like, oh snap, this is probably the worst thing that I could ever deal with, and how do I fix this problem? And the reason we chose those 3 different girls is because we wanted to reach out to our students and say that there's a different scenario for each and every one of these people, and before possibly you have premarital sex, you consider what the outcome might be for you, and is this the right decision for you? And we just wanted it to be an eye-opener. We didn't promote it and say, go have babies, it's the best thing ever. Just, their viewpoints. We also talked to the dads within those stories to find out what it was going to be like for them if they were still around, kind of thing. And then we talked to kids of divorced parents. I was one of those mentioned within the stories. I'm the child of an alcoholic father. And like I said, I tried to play soccer. My dad came home so very drunk one day from work that entering my subdivision, we had like a little median, and my soccer coach lived on one side and my dad was coming in to this side. So very, very drunk and out of his mind, should not have been driving, obviously, drove across the center median and put his car into my soccer coach's house. You think the next day that when I went back to school, people aren't going, pss, 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 pss. How did I feel about that? I was pretty devastated because, as a teenager, we're pretty emotional and things can set us off, and that upset me. And so we talked to my dad and we got his viewpoint of why did you do that and how did that happen? And then we also talked about hotline numbers in a runaway story and reasons why kids were running away and what that meant to parents as well as the students. And in the hotline numbers, we said, if you're considering this, here's a number that maybe before you make that decision to go and run away from where your comfort zone should be, maybe you can call these people and ask for help. And this is a story that, even though I was quoted within the divorce story and part of that, this one hit home for me because I worked at Target in the 80s, and there was a kid named Reggie, and Reggie ran away. And for whatever reason, wherever Reggie was running to, he stopped in Target, Excuse me. And Reggie went into the bathroom at that point in time while I was working and took his own life. It's really a sad way to go if you stop and think about it, when maybe this could have been prevented by simply running these articles that gave that hotline number. And I realize, as it was with any article, even something that you guys may read, it doesn't hit home to everybody, but if you reach one person in your target audience, haven't you made a difference? And really that's what journalism about is about reaching out. It's about connecting with feelings. It's about understanding people's needs and finding them and addressing them. That's what we wanted to do. So we've written these articles. Sturgis is still hanging out with us. We get ready. Everything looks good. This is what the layout was going to look like. Pretty straightforward. We find out then that Sturgis has taken another job and he left. And that was devastating because he was that guy. And so they have brought in another substitute teacher by the name of Miss Adams. And Miss Adams wasn't by no means a journalism teacher. No means. She was a substitute that struggled to put lipstick on correctly. Bless her heart, she looked like a little clown every day because she'd sit up there and she working at it, and it was all over her face. And we're like, God love her. How's she going to help us? So Mr. Reynolds identified that there was an issue with our substitute teacher, so he decided he was going to try and help us. And he went to our sister school, rival school, right? You guys ever have rival schools? Hazelwood Central. And in comes the presence of Mr. Emerson. And Mr. Emerson is a true journalism teacher. And it was his processes with his school that he was going to take these articles and take this spreadsheet, go down to Mr. Reynolds and say, okay, what do you think? Well, that's prior restraint. Because when they objected to the articles, they never came back to us and said, hey, here's an issue within this, you maybe left a name in there or something, fix it. That never happened. So therefore, that's the violation of our rights right there with the prior restraint. This was on a Friday afternoon that all of this happened. And so we're thinking, now what's going to happen? We didn't know anything about it, unbeknownst to us, because it's the end of the day. They've met, and Monday morning rolls around, and we're ready to sell the paper. It's sold for 25 whole cents. Go figure, right? That's big bucks in the 80s. And so we were looking for these articles and we can't find them, and we decided there was really no one else we could go to. Sturgis wouldn't have any clue because he's not there, and Emerson is in his own classroom in his own school, so we can't contact him. So our next source was to go to Mr. Reynolds. And we went down to his office. There was a group of us, and we're pretty irate kids at this point, even though we've always been the good kids. And we go down to him and say, hey, I think there's a problem with our paper, and what are we supposed to do about it? Because where's this spread? This is the impact stories that we've worked on. It's a special edition of the May 13th, 83 edition, and it's missing. And in my little simple brain, I'm thinking, okay, that maybe it's going to come tomorrow, and we're going to delay selling it today, and we're going to insert it tomorrow, and we're going to sell it. And he says, hey, here's a problem. And so I decided not to run those articles because they're too mature for an immature audience. And I'm thinking, okay, now can you figure that maybe I'm a little slightly outspoken and not afraid to stand up for things? I came up with the comment and I said, so if I'm old enough to get pregnant, I'm not old enough to read about it? I don't understand. And do you think I became his friend? Not so much. Not so much. And he says, well, I am the decision maker, so therefore that's what's going to be. And I thought, okay. So we all decided, he said, you guys figure out what you need to do, but we're not going to sell, or you're going to sell the paper as it stands. And if you choose not to, there won't be the next edition. Well, this being May, school is ending soon. The next edition to come out was the senior edition, and that's the tribute to all of our outgoing seniors. And maybe you guys have some of those same things in there still today, where they talk about who's most likely to succeed and who's the cutest couple, who's got the best hair. Well, that's important, right? So we go back upstairs to the classroom, and we're going to take a vote, because that's politically correct, and that's how we're going to fix this thing. And so there's more seniors in the class than us little lowly juniors. Guess who won the vote? The seniors, of course. So the seniors are going to go out and sell the paper. So they hightail it downstairs, and they're set up in the commons, and they're selling their paper for their quarter, and I'm going to have my most rebellious moment ever. And I snuck out of class. Woo, right? Big stuff, that's me. Put on my big girl panties, and I snuck right out of class into the library where there was a phone, because we didn't have cell phones. Hard to believe, that long ago, that's a true story. We didn't have cell phones, so I snuck out of class, and I went over there because I had Mr. Sturgis's phone number. And I made a phone call. And I said, hey, Sturge, guess what just happened? And he was like, what, you saw in the paper, all's good, it's Friday. And I'm like, or it's Monday. I said, nope, no, didn't happen. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, we got censored. Remember how you told us that we had rights? It doesn't apply in Hazelwood East. We don't. And we're mad. And I said, what do we do? So him being that guy that, he tells me whatever, I'm like, okay, yeah, we're going to do that. He says, call the ACLU. I didn't know who they were. He says, American Civil Liberties Union. And I'm like, okay. So he says, they're going to help you. Call them. Here's even the phone number. He was right on it that quick. And I kind of had the feeling that he anticipated something was brewing, because maybe that's why he left, but he was a good enough man that he never told us that there were issues between him and Reynolds. So I trot back across, sneaking back into the J1 class or J2 class, and I say, hey guys, here's what Sturge said. He said, we need to contact the ACLU. What do you think? So, it's most of the juniors and one brave senior, Leanne, that was still up there with us. And they're all like, we're going to go home. We're going to talk to our parents, and because we want to get permission, because that's the right thing to do, still right. And we want to go and talk to them. So I went home that night, and my mama, bless her heart, you guys have mama bears? You talk about a mama bear for a little bitty woman. Mama bear was going to eat somebody when I came home and I told her about it. And she said, you know what? If that's what you want to do, you have my full support. And I'm like, score. Now, I have learned from the best about being a mama bear. So you think my mama was bad? Oh, have mercy. I win. My kids are like, oh, stop, please. Please stop. So we go and we meet with the ACLU. We've set the appointment and we go there, and they said, hey, so this happened. We're like, yeah, we were censored. We don't understand why. We were just told that we're not mature enough to read about problems that relate to us. And so they said, we would like to support you in this, and we'll take your case. Okay. Now, little did I know what that meant. I just thought they were going to go tell Mr. Reynolds, you have to run these articles. No. So when the ACLU decides to pick this up, do you think maybe now that the media has become involved? Oh, yeah. You talk about a big media storm. Things blew up. Did not make Mr. Reynolds happy even more. At this point, now Mr. Reynolds has decided that I should have a shadow. I was no longer responsible to be able to find my way to my classes by myself, that I needed him to follow me to make sure I wasn't skipping. Guys, I was such a good kid in high school, I never even had detention. So this is, I was Mary Beth. I was like my brave stand of, whoa, here we go. So as the media is covering all this, the St. Louis Globe-Democrat, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch have now run these articles. These articles right here on the screen, they ran them in full. Now here Mr. Reynolds was worried about just the local community of Hazelwood and Florissant seeing this, that there's a pregnancy problem. What do you think just happened? You think that whole plan backfired on him because now the coverage has grown massively? The news stations are calling to interview me. They call him at school and they'd like to interview him. He's not a happy man, hence why he probably followed me. Every day he would go to my chemistry class and ask Mr. Moore where I was. We had movable walls so you could actually just see over if he was a big man, just look over the wall. He could find me. I was in there every single day. And Mr. Moore would say, leave her alone, go. But my friends also became concerned about this because there was a lot of media attention to them and they were being questioned about things. And back in high school, my friends didn't all understand what I was trying to do because I was just trying to help them, along with Leslie Smart and Leanne West. And we just wanted to make a difference and get the articles published. Ultimately, that's all we wanted. And like I said, that really backfired on him, Mr. Reynolds, when these national publications, along with, you guys may recognize New York Times, Guess who also ran that? So all of these things are happening, and he's not a happy man. And the coverage is massive at this point. We're also contacted by, you guys know who Oprah is, right? Okay. God bless Oprah, I love her. But before Oprah came along, there was a man called Phil Donahue. And Phil Donahue was the Oprah of the 80s. And he was in Chicago, and Phil Donahue contacted us and said, we'd like you to come to Chicago. So we're pretty excited, right? It's 3 high school girls. We're going to go on an unparental supervised trip to Chicago, and we're going to be on TV. And that's exciting stuff. So we get on TV, and they are interviewing people, and they're standing up like what's happening here in the studio audience. And there's a little, sweet little grandma stands up and says, well, back in my day, well, guess where the camera is pointing? Right on my face, and my mama is at home recording this bad boy. And I'm rolling my eyes going, what does she know? Right, kind of thing. I got home, and my mom was like, don't you do that, baby. So now my mission, Mr. Scott is giving me, is that I have to find this hidden missing tape of Phil Donahue and make it public for everybody. So at some point, well, that will hopefully be something you can go find and laugh. So I get back to school, and good old Mr. Reynolds, right back. Mr. Reynolds says, Ms. Kuhlmeier, I would like to visit with you in my office. Okay, whatever. So I go back down there, and he says, why did this happen? I understand that you were on Phil Donahue. Why? And I said, because they called us, and we wanted to go. And he said, you didn't ask my permission. And I was like, kind of that, excuse me, say what? And I said, my mom said I could go, and I have a note. I gave the office a note. I don't understand. He goes, no, you don't do that. He said, if you ever decide to think about something like that action again, I will either personally suspend or expel you. And I'm like, oh, what? Right, so I'm scared, and he's thinking that that's going to stop it. But the wheels are already set in motion on this, and it's kind of hard to backtrack at this point. So one of his biggest objections, is she the pregnant girl? You think that's legit? Is she pregnant? Yes? No? Yes? He said, I know who that person is, and on that day that we sat in his office, he said, I know exactly who that is. I can tell you who all these people that you're talking about are. And I said, who was that? And he said, name someone. I said, no, it's me. And as we sat in that office that day, I was very not pregnant. But through the miracle of, again, teenage intelligence and ingenuity, I had rolled up a shirt, stuffed it up underneath my sweater, and ta-da, through immaculate conception, I am pregnant. Right? I wasn't pregnant until I was 28. We missed it by a few years. But as we have rolled on through this, the ACLU's filed it. He's following me everywhere. We're into my senior year of high school, and I'm excited because graduation's coming. And think, okay, every you guys that are seniors, you're ready to walk across a stage and have that cheesy moment in front of your parents go, and they're going to take your picture, shaking your principal's hand, and they're going to give you your diploma, right? My picture like that is the size of his head. He wouldn't even make eye contact and look at me because he thought I was a bad kid. Now, my friends, being the comedians that they were that did still support me on this, they made me a really fun shirt that I have to find also. It's probably somewhere with that video that says SH blank blank, but the letters were there. You fill them in. Disturber. And what do you think I happened to wear underneath my cap and gown that day? Yep, I wore that shirt. And I really wanted to Superman it across the stage and go, whoa! But I know my mama would have slapped me bald-headed, so we didn't do that. Because I really was afraid of my mom. She was a single mama, and she ruled my world. But we did all the right things in these stories. We had gotten the consent. We said, after the articles were written and everything, the ACLU supported us because we had done the right things. We were the responsible journalists. We said, here's the quotes. If everything is accurate and fair, initial it. Let's go one step further because you guys are minors. Take it home to your parents. also have them review it, make sure everything's okay, because we don't want to be in trouble. And have them initial and sign off on it. If your parent, my dad was quoted in the story, have them sign off on it. So we did those things. We were being responsible. And like I said, we changed the names, and that was an image within there called a blurb where they did change that. But apparently that wasn't enough, because the case has gone to court, and I've made it into college at this point. And they are wondering what in the world is going on, who is this person. I was really active in college as well. I wrote for the paper there, and I just continued to stay involved, but it was a long-distance phone call because of no cell phones, and my attorney decided that she wasn't going to call me to let me know that this was actually made it to the Supreme Court and was about to be heard on October the 13th of 1987. It's my senior year of college, and I don't know that this is happening. I was very disconnected because she couldn't make that long-distance phone call, didn't want to foot that bill. I didn't go to court. I didn't know about it. This is something that I've followed that carries my name to this day, and I wasn't there. And that was pretty upsetting to me to find out. My mom said if she would have told me, she was still in St. Louis where Miss Edwards was, she would have paid for the calls, or she would have called me herself had she taken the common courtesy to get in touch with me. Just let me know. I wanted to be there, but I wasn't. And on January 13th, 1988, the decision came out that we lost. And the way that I found out was I was on a snowy day in January in my dorm room in Cape Girardeau in Southeast Missouri State, and I got a knock on my door from one of my residents. I was an RA where I was in charge of the floor, and we had one community phone, and I had a phone call out in the hall, and my student said, "Hey, can you come and take this call?" Usually it would be my mom, just checking in, but it was a reporter from the Southeast Missourian asking me for comment about losing the case. And I was like, I don't understand. What are you talking about? And he says, you guys, the ruling just came out from the justices and you guys lost. And I said, I don't have a comment because right now anything that I may say is probably not going to be nice and I don't want to present myself in that way. But we lost the case. The ruling came out, and I'm going to read this to you because I don't want to get it wrong. But the rule says, the rule against prior restraint does not apply to the publication of a student-operated school newspaper. In Hazelwood School District v. Kuhlmeier, the Supreme Court upheld a public school principal's decision to remove controversial material from the school newspaper. The principal based his decision on fears that the articles on teen pregnancy and divorce would allow students to identify classmates who encountered such difficulties. Justice Byron R. White ruled that educators did not offend the First Amendment by exercising editorial control, so long as their actions are reasonably related to legitimate pedagogical, which is your teachers and your educators' concerns. But if they were concerned about the fact that they could identify the people and that we didn't have consent and we were just bad journalism in essence, we shot that down because we had changed the names. We had told them all of these things. We had signed consent. And oh, by the way, the same topics had run 10 years before. Miss Edwards didn't bring any of that up. They offer you before you go before the justices because it's such a grand venue and a scary place, especially when you're a new attorney, to offer you a mock trial. And guess who decided she didn't need to do it? She thought she was such a rock star, she didn't need to go to this mock trial. So as she gets in there, she is bumbling through things. There is a site called Oye, which I would strongly encourage any of you to go and look up. You can hear the proceedings of the hearings. You can hear everything that happened, and you can hear Miss Edwards bumble her way through this. And the justices are constantly asking her, well, do you mean this? What do you mean? What are you trying to say? She blew it because she didn't bring up important facts. And so we lost. So they go on to say within the ruling, in essence, it said that the rights of public school students are not necessarily the same of adults in other settings. A different test applies to censorship by school officials of student expression in a school-sponsored activity, such as a student newspaper that was not a public forum for student expression. So rather than the fact of what really the reason that Mr. Reynolds took that out, he was afraid of embarrassment to his community, was that our attorney didn't represent us how she should have. So those kind of things aren't in your textbooks, right? Completely untold story. So based upon those kind of things, when I initially asked you how you felt about things, and a few of you said, maybe the students were still right, do you still think that's the case? Yes, ma'am. Emma says that everything we did was right, essentially, right? That it was, we did our jobs as a journalist. We weren't substantially disruptive. It's not like we were running through the hallways of Hazelwood East waving the paper going, looky here, who's pregnant? Wasn't happening. They had the option to buy or not buy the paper. But we lost. And so therefore it has impacted you still today. It impacts collegiate journalists. And that's not what we wanted to happen by any means. And that's unfortunate for us because you guys have so many important and valid things that you talk about, that you want to say, that need to be heard. And if we don't support students within high school where they start to begin to foster the love of journalism, whatever you want to talk about, whatever your platform is, we're missing the boat on it by not allowing you to express that. My son went to Central High School in Springfield, Missouri. Ironically, I'm just going to touch on this real briefly because I think it's interesting that in 1954, Brown v. Board of Education, Miss Brown originated, it started in Kansas, and that was over segregation. She actually graduated from the high school that my kids were at. What are the chances? Kind of cool. But my son, being a journalist in his high school, decided he wanted to be a little bit like his mama, and that made me so proud. And Eric is one of those kids that's probably like a lot of you that is the overachiever. He goes above and beyond. And he was a staffer, and ironically, a lot of things parallel what just happened to Eric. Eric was censored, in a nutshell. Now, what are the chances of it happening to my kid just like it did me? He had an advisor that had just left. Miss Haynes, who had been the previous advisor, was an amazing woman. And I was allowed to go into the school and talk to the kids on a regular basis and tell my story, much like I'm telling you. But the new teacher came in and she didn't want me in her classroom. That year there was also a new principal for Eric, and she was a little intimidated. She's like that big, bless her heart, cute as she could be, but she was afraid of what was going on. She didn't want these things to happen. And so what they wrote about was a rite of passage story for the seniors. And at Central, they have a game called Assassins. Anybody know what Assassins is? It's a water gun fight. And they tell you the 5 W's within that story of who, what, when, where, and why, about you've got to be a senior, you have to play it off campus, it's going to cost you $1. Like I said, it's a rite of passage, and the story ran every year. Central High School in Missouri is the oldest standing high school, so it's happened for a long time. And they were writing the story just to alert the seniors this game is coming up, and it's a fun time for everybody. But it's off campus, right? It's just running it here as the source of transferring that information. So I'm not even going to say her name, she's not nice. The new advisor didn't allow that story to run, and Eric was kind of hacked. And he comes home and he's like, Mom, now remember, Mama Bear, raised from the best. He says, the story didn't run. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's there's nothing to it. It's a nuts and bolts kind of story. And so he proceeds to tell me what went on. So the next day, I decide Mama Bear is going to step in and I'm going to call his advisor. And Eric is in the classroom at the end of the day, and he's finishing up his story that he's working on, and he answered the phone, and he knew it was Mom on the phone and knew this call was coming. And he hands the phone over to his advisor, and I said, hey, this is Eric's mom, and I think we've never really met, but Miss Gardner told you who I was, right? And that I was a participant in a landmark case in the country. And so I'm just kind of curious why you would censor an article like that. She goes, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you didn't run this article. And I said, there's nothing wrong with the article. She said, it promotes gun violence. I said, again, outspoken that I am, how many people have died by water gun? Probably not a lot. And she said, well, we're not going to do that. And she proceeded to kind of get irate with me on the phone. And I'm thinking, my kid's in the class, and you're raising your voice to me, and I'm working really hard at being very nice. Some days it's a real big struggle. So she says, well, who are you to tell me anything about this? And I said, Well, I was kind of involved in a little bit of First Amendment stuff. I, kind of participated in a case that went to Supreme Court. How about you? And she said, what do you know about the First Amendment? So I said, baby, did you forget the conversation Miss Gardner had with you that, what I did? And it's not like, I consider myself a superhero or anything because, again, that's Mary Beth. That's not me. I'm just Mama Bear. And I wanted this article to run for my kid because he worked on it. And so she says, we're not going to discuss it, and there's no further discussion about it. And, if you think there's anything that you need to say to me, then you need to take it with somebody else because you really have no business what happens in my classroom. Lady, we should probably talk a little more nicely because anything that involves my kid in your classroom has now involved Mama. And so she finally hung up on me. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. So I called back. We're going to bypass this lady. I'm done. So I call and I get the principal's office. And fortunately for Miss Anderson, the new principal there, she was out of the office that day at a seminar, and I got the assistant principal. I don't think he was able to probably sit comfortably much longer because I chewed on him for so long and so hard. And I said, you've got a teacher in your classroom, actually where my kid is at right now, and I said, I really have a hard time appreciating any way that she's just spoken to me. She's completely unprofessional, and oh, by the way, she doesn't understand about supporting your kids and what First Amendment rights are, and she censored the paper. I think you have a problem in your school. And he was like, oh, okay. And I said, I expect something to be done about this. Well, he went back to her and I guess had a conversation with her, and she got in trouble. And she felt threatened by it, so the next day she goes back into class and she tells all the kids when they come in, hey, everybody take your electronics and turn them off and put them up on a table away from you. And she proceeds to threaten all the kids. I'm like, how is this happening? How is any of this happening to my kid? Because another thing with ours is that there was a typewritten letter that appeared anonymously. No one would own up to it and signed it when I went through this. And it just threatened us to the point that said if any other kids decide they're going to speak up about this to the media and let anybody else know that there's problems in our school, there's going to be repercussions. And now this lady is telling the kids in my son's classroom that if you're a senior and I've happened to write a letter of recommendation to you, I'm going to revoke it. That's pretty devastating. The seniors are scared. My son was the incoming editor the next year. You won't be the editor. And he was like, Mom, lay off of this. I want to be the editor. And it scared the kids. And I'm telling him when he got home that night, I'm saying, Eric, none of this is okay. This is exactly what we're fighting against. This is why we need to continue to stand up, because it's not okay to threaten you. It's not okay for you guys to go to school and feel scared about what a teacher should do. Your teacher should be there to support you. And I asked her point blank, I said, so if you were in my situation and as a parent and you were afraid of what's going on with your kid and your teacher is telling them no, wouldn't you expect your teacher to stand up for your student? She said, I'm not to the point that I'm going to lose my job for my kids. I thought, shame on you. Shame on you, because you should be there to support your kids. You are there fostering their environment. You are growing their minds and you're growing our future, and you're afraid. So shame on you. So they didn't end up running the article because the kids were afraid. But I ended up contacting the Student Law Press Center from Washington, D.C. because Mary Beth and Dave and I happen to know Frank Lamonte, who was the director there. And I said, Frank, we have a problem and it's happening again in Hazelwood. It's happening at Central High School. And he said, what are you talking about? So I told him everything, and he said, let me help. So Frank steps in and gave them a civics lesson on what is important and what is not important and how they should be protecting their kids. And that teacher was put on academic probation because it wasn't okay. So anytime something like that happens to you guys, please speak up. And that will always be something that is so passionate to me about standing up for your rights, because it is so very, very important and should always remain that way. You shouldn't ever have to go to school and feel afraid. So in comparison to my case, where I think it's pretty tame, there was a case in 1987, Bethel v. Frazier. Is anybody familiar with that? And I'm going to read you this, so bear with me on this one. Because I think it's entertaining, but the reason that I choose to tell you this story is because to me it's extreme, and it's something that I as a student would have crossed that line. But the background on this one, it's a provocative speech statement, and it's the guy is running for student body election. He's got a friend that's going to write a story, his speech for him, and it's very inappropriate, especially to be heard in that setting. He said, I know a man who's firm. He's firm in his pants, he's firm in his shirt, his character is firm, but most of all, his belief in you, the students of Bethel, is firm. Jeff Kuhlmeier is a man who takes his point and pounds it in. If necessary, he'll take an issue and nail it to the wall. He doesn't attack things in spurts. He drives hard, pushing and pushing until finally he succeeds. Jeff is a man who will go to the very end, even in the climax, for each and every one of you. So vote for Jeff for the student body principal or vice president. He'll never come between you and your high school. Really? So he's in trouble for this, and he sues. Now, who do you think on this instance happened to lose? He lost, and I think I understand pretty well why, especially now as a parent that I'm like, yeah. Another one came along, and this one I think is extreme as well, and this was 2002 Morse v. Frederick. You guys heard of bong hits for Jesus? And bong hits for Jesus, he was upset because he was getting in trouble. He was a student that would go part day at this facility and then part day at a community college. And he came back to pick his girlfriend up, and he was sitting outside the Commons, and they said, no, you can't do that. And he was in trouble for that. And so he decided he was going to protest that and wanted to become an embarrassment to the school. Because in 2002, the Olympics were going through Anchorage where this happened, and they were going to actually be taking the Olympic torch with all of the media and the cameras and everything down in front of his high school. And so he makes this massive banner that I believe is in the museum, and it says bong hits for Jesus, and he sits outside of the school. Well, do you think maybe the news cameras go, whoop? So there's bong hits for Jesus. On that instance, who loses? He lost also. So to me, I'm pretty tame because I'm writing about problems about us. And we weren't okay. So there's a movement currently across the country called New Voices of USA. You can find it through Facebook. There's a website that New York is also actively participating in. And what's going to happen through New Voices is it's going to help to restore your rights. And Missouri, God love us, we're special. We're going to be the last ones to finally come through with it and get it right. And there was also a media coverage that had my little pretty 80s hairdo on a book. We're so proud. And the movement through New Voices was successful. I testified along with a lot of other really important, more intelligent people than I will ever dream to be in North Dakota. And it was successful passing there. There's currently 13 states that have passed New Voices. If you guys, I know you guys are so smart and you like to be involved and take a stand on things, this would be a great one for you to participate in. You can contact your representatives and your senators and express your interest in having rights, because they're basic for all of us and we should all have those rights. So you can contact that and get on the bandwagon for it. And then finally, with Stand Up and Speak Out is Cure Hazelwood. And that's my personal mission, is that continue to stand up for things that we don't believe that are right, that we attempt to give students any help that we can and help to make a difference and restore the rights. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. That's right, over the right mic, yeah. All right, so we have some time for questions and answers. I just want to point out also that with the QR Hazelwood campaign, although Cathy lost at the Supreme Court of the United States, the standard that the Supreme Court came down with was that schools have the power to censor student expression in a school newspaper if it is a legitimate pedagogical concern. And that's kind of the legal loophole right there. Is it a legitimate pedagogical concern? So unfortunately, in Cathy's case, because a lot of facts did not come out, the court thought that it was. But there have also been cases where schools have censored student expression in school newspapers, and courts have said that was not a legitimate pedagogical concern, and they've ruled in favor of students. Specifically, there's a case out of Michigan that was decided in 2004, where a student journalist wrote a story about how the school district's buses were idling at the school bus depot, and the fumes were making people in a surrounding neighborhood sick. And the people in the surrounding neighborhood filed a lawsuit. So the student journalist wrote a very accurate story, the who, the why, the what, the when, the where, about that, and the school said, you can't publish this in our school newspaper. This is, litigation. It's not appropriate for our school newspaper. We're not allowing it to be published. And that student sued, and the court, using the standard in Hazelwood v. Kuhlmeier, said, no, that is not a legitimate pedagogical concern. This is a story that is good journalism. The community has a right to know, the student has a right to publish, and the student won. So I just don't want you left with the impression that that all is lost here. It's about what's legitimate and what's not, and I think that's the key, is you have to look at what is a legitimate pedagogical concern and what isn't. But Cathy, through the Cure Hazelwood campaign and her work with the Student Press Law Center, I believe the number is 13 now, 13 states and the District of Columbia have passed laws that are called anti-Hazelwood laws, which are laws that create actual additional protections for student journalists and their advisors, so beyond the rights that have been recognized by the Supreme Court of the United States. So I think that's important. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. But what we're going to do is we have about 10 minutes for question and answers with Cathy. So I've been asked to set this up a little bit differently. So up on top and down here, if you want to ask a question, if you could just line up along that wall, and we'll try to get to as many students as we can. Okay, so up top, if you just line up on that side, okay, and we'll go back and forth, okay?
While you guys are kind of getting assembled for the questions, one thing I forgot to mention to you, through one of my trips in 2012, where I actually met Mr. Scott and Mary Beth and John, I was in Kansas City, the University of Kansas City Law School, and it's the first time that I've crossed path with Mr. Reynolds. And we are outside in this vestibule waiting for the shuttle to come and pick us up, and he comes up and wants to hug me. And I was like, what? No. And so we get into this room that's bigger than this, and it is just absolutely packed to the gills with people. And we're sitting up in front of everyone and having a conversation about Hazelwood. And he comes up with this point and says, I never really read the articles. And there was an audible gasp throughout the room thinking, what did you just say? And he said, I was asking questions. I said, I don't understand. How could this have happened that you never read the articles, but yet you said they were essentially trash is what you told us, that they weren't any good. And he said, well, no, you were a good kid the whole time. And I was like, why'd you follow me everywhere? I was angry at this point. And I don't think the way that he continued, he said, well, everything was really just a budget cut. We didn't have the money to do that. It wasn't anything to do with they were bad articles or they were inappropriate or too mature. We didn't have money. So I think he completely lost credibility because everyone in the room was still questioning, what are you talking about? Maybe, and I still think maybe he's just old, bless his heart, that he forgot everything that went on because it's been 30 years. But it'll be a question that I'll continue to live with of, did he read them? Did he forget that he read them? And why did it happen?
I think one of the things that I learned from that experience, because I had the benefit of being there, was that these cases, as you read about them in the reported opinions or in the history books, sometimes there really is a story behind the story. And Principal Reynolds, he was asked specifically, what about this legitimate pedagogical concern? And his response, I'll never forget, was, oh, that was something the lawyers made up. But that is a little bit of a lesson in that when you see these cases and the controversies as they develop, and how they actually get set up in the courts as a legal issue, sometimes there's a gap. And I think that certainly in your case, there's an example of that. So I'm going to tell you that we're not going to have time to get to all of you, but I will do the best we can. So if you could just ask your question just quickly, concisely. So introduce yourself, what school you're from, and ask Cathy your question.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Justin. I'm back. I want to ask you how you feel about people coming out with like the gun laws and stuff, like especially in schools. Like, how do you feel about the gun laws? People pushing for gun laws.
Because I'm a mama, I would tend to favor them because I want my kid to come home safe every day, and I think that's going to help.
Hello, I'm Catherine Ortiz. I'm from Bayshore High School, and as most schools, we have an abstinence-only education, and I was wondering if, like, I'm part of a women's empowerment group in my school, and we've talked about the possibilities of possibly changing that. But I was wondering if you thought personally that abstinence-only education worked, and if not, do you think there are any better ways to deal with the issue of teen pregnancies in school?
Well, as much as what I think it's difficult to admit to the fact that there are teen pregnancy problems, it happens. But I think, honestly, having the daycare in school to keep the girls involved is probably one of the better ideas, even though I know it costs the schools money. You're keeping the girls in school. And ultimately, that's what matters, is that we need to have educated women because you're powerful, ladies. You are so very powerful.
Okay, we'll take a question up top.
Well, I'm Chris Galley from North Babylon High School, and I want to
Can
know...
you speak up, please? I can't hear.
Oh.
My head is so congested. I'm so sorry.
My name is Chris Galley. I'm from North Babylon High School, and I'd like to know, along your fight, have you felt any doubts towards whether you would succeed or not, or even now?
Have I felt doubts
Yes.
about what we did?
Yeah, about what you're fighting for.
No, I never doubted my actions. I've been very confident that we did make the right choice. The only thing that I would like to say that I would have done differently would have been more informed about our choice of an attorney. Miss Edwards blew things for us. She also, after she lost this case, she lost her practice, she became ill, and she passed away. So that would be my doubt there in the choice of what the ACLU gave us as an attorney.
Okay, one more question up top.
Hi, my name is Alex, and I'm from Massapequa High School. And I was wondering, what is your opinion on social media platforms being able to restrict the speech of political figures that they see as controversial?
I think you guys have a right to express what you feel because there's important things that need to be communicated. One thing I do believe, though, is if it becomes to the point that it's threatening to someone, I think we need to be more of a cautious line on that because to kind of give you a scheme of where Hazelwood is, everybody heard about what happened in Ferguson, right? I was originally from the Delwood-Ferguson area, and my church was one of those that was burned down, where I grew up and was baptized and married. So things like that where they cross the line and they're potentially putting someone in danger, I do have an issue with that, but as long as it is something that is a positive movement, I am absolutely in favor of people speaking up because it's how we adopt change, and we have to continue to move forward and grow.
Okay, we'll take a question here.
My name is Zachary Villa. I'm a senior at Deer Park High School. My question is, how do you believe the censorship of stories in the media affects the American people and their ability to view the media as a trusted source?
I think it's made it a lot harder because they're trying to hide things from us that maybe we need to know, and that's why investigative reporting and you guys getting involved in journalism early on in your lives helps because it gives you the initiative of maybe things and different ways to dig out information and that you can share. And so I think that's a valid point, and we need to continue to do it. Just share your knowledge.
Thank you.
All right, we have a question up top.
My name is Samantha.
I'm going to ask just for the students if you could hold the applause because in the interest of time, we do want to get the questions out, and it's just taking up time that we really don't have right now.
Hi, my name is Samantha. I'm a senior from Massapequa High School. I'm actually majoring in journalism next year, so do you have any advice to people who are starting out in the field?
I would say be inquisitive. Always question, always dig. If someone tells you no, that doesn't necessarily, that means that's the final end-all be-all answer. Ask why. Why do you say I can't do that? And if they do, challenge it. Stand up and speak out, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, my name's Jacob Sperling. I'm from Bayshore High School. And my question is, do you think the result of the court case changed your view on American justice?
I think so. I would have to say yes, it did change my opinion of things. I find that it didn't go as
planned. I kind of had a better outlook than what happened, but I think that goes back to our attorney as well. And I would like to think that if it were heard now, that we would have a different outcome. The time of the setting that we were being heard in the courts, there was only 8 justices on the panel instead of the traditional 9. Justice Powell had just stepped down and Kennedy was incoming, and we lost the decision of 5-3. And had we tied at 4-4, we would have actually won because we won at the appellate level. So hopefully, like I said, if it was heard today, I think we would have a different outcome because I think the justices are realizing they got it wrong. And from what I understand, Justice O'Connor would have now changed her opinion of her decision, which could have been the swing. Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Isabella.
Do you believe that the reputation, regardless of like Supreme Court decisions, do you personally believe that the reputation of a school is a legitimate pedagogical concern?
I think it's an image that they try and protect because everyone wants their school to be painted in the right picture. And I understand that that's what Mr. Reynolds was doing, but I think that he was afraid to have hard conversations with us and say, hey, maybe you didn't do this right, let's go back and attempt to fix things. And I think if there were better communication between administration and students, I think we would have a whole lot better world and a whole lot better opportunity for you guys to voice your opinions and concerns rather than just being stifled by everything.
I think that's a great question, and this is something that Mary Beth and I and Cathy have really talked about. And I think that when you make a choice to censor, it's usually the worst possible choice because you wind up with the problem of all that information getting out anyway, plus the perception that you've now tried to stifle it. And it just takes a problem and it makes it worse. It's communication and compromise that really moves things forward. So I think that's a great question. Thank you. Next question.
Perhaps that he come to us and talk to us about it, and with his concerns that he didn't want this to reach outside of the doors of Hazelwood, and give us the opportunity to fix things, and we would have just run the articles there. We probably wouldn't have ever had the issue of the coverage that we got, because you talk about a big platform with it running nationally. Everybody knew.
Hi, I'm Ashley Rodriguez. I'm a sophomore at Bayshore High School. As a journalist at such a young age, were you ever afraid or anxious of your other peers' opinion on your writing?
I don't think so. I think that the group of us, the core of us, were very all talented journalists. We worked together. We were good kids. And traditionally, I think you find that the students coming into the J programs are the overachievers, and they work to do right, and they support each other. And that's just something that I see within my own kid. And he's continuing to write today for his collegiate paper. So I think, no, I can't say that I was afraid of any of that, especially when Mama was supporting me.
All right, so I have to be mindful of the fact that all of you shortly need to get on school buses, so we're going to take one more question. Okay, so if you can come on up, and my apologies to the final four.
Hi, my name's Maddie. I'm from Connecticut High School, and for our walkout last year, our school actually over the loudspeaker said there will be consequences if you participate. And that caused kind of a negative connection with our students to our administration. So do you have any advice on how students and administration can positively work towards them expressing their rights rather than using fear tactics to kind of suppress them?
Did you guys go to your administration and say, this is our concern, and give them the opportunity to tell you why they decided that?
Yes, actually, students went to administration, and we got a 7-second moment of silence when students were really strongly trying to show support for the victims and stuff like that, and we feel like it was kind of minimized and almost disrespected.
I would have said that I would have just continued to ask about it and say that we need more, and this is our reasons, and then give them a valid list of reasons. And even if it came down to the point of you needed a petition of signatures saying, here's our student body, and this is our opinion on this, and this is why we think it's important. And then you could also challenge it as far as if that's still not good enough with your directly within your school, go to your school board and ask for their support, which we totally bypassed the board. We just...
You want to speak to that as well? For the question that was just asked, I saw you kind of nodding your...
Scott 7 says, when you don't win, when you don't get what you want, are you going to give up? No. There's always another way to keep going, keep trying. Use one of your other rights. Maybe write an article, have a petition like Cathy said. You wrote to Governor Cuomo. See? That's good. Good job. So you had some victory. All right. Good going. Good going. Yes.
Stand up.
Okay, so let's give a big round of applause to Cathy. I want to share my great appreciation to Mary Beth and Cathy for being here today. Truly wonderful to have these two icons of freedom together with all of you. So our plan now is, I'm mindful of the fact that we need to get you on the buses, and I'm going to ask for everyone's cooperation on this. How many of you have ever visited Disney World? So you know how like you go to Disney World and they have the characters and you kind of line up, you do the photo and they shoot you off? So what we want to be able to do is we want to provide each school with an opportunity to have a group photo with Mary Beth and Cathy and Patty DeRochers, who is the communications director here at Touro Law Center, who's been absolutely amazing to work with, by the way. Thank you so much. And also the IT department, just absolutely amazing. Thank you. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to ask for real cooperation with this. So what you're going to do is we're going to call up a group. The teacher's going to quickly get you posed. Mary Beth and Cathy are going to take a picture with you, and we're going to shoot you off, and we're going to call off the next group. So we need to just do this quickly. So the first school that we're going to do is Bayshore. So if you could come and line up right here in the front.